So, picture this. I just bought my first condo at 26, something I worked my whole life for. And instead of congratulations, my parents accused me of making my sister feel like a failure. Yeah, they actually tried to take me to court over it. But here's the twist, they had no idea about a secret account I discovered years ago, and it's about to turn everything upside down. By the way, where in the world are you watching from today? It's wild to think about. I'd been running myself ragged for years. At 16, I started working at a diner, then stacked on 2 more jobs while I was in college just to make ends meet and pay off my loans. Every spare dollar I earned went into savings. And for 4 years, I lived in this tiny studio apartment, surviving on instant noodles and lukewarm tea. I'd gotten used to exhaustion being my constant companion. But nothing prepared me for the night I came home with a 102-degree fever after a 12-hour shift. My head was pounding along with the radiator's hiss, my lungs a deep rattling reminder that I'd pushed myself too far. And yet, quitting wasn't an option. The market was volatile. My job as a junior analyst was demanding, and taking a sick day felt like admitting defeat. I curled up in my little armchair, barely able to hold my phone, and when it buzzed with my mother's name, I almost didn't answer. But something made me swipe. "Hi, Mom." My voice was scratchy, raw from coughing, and I braced for her usual sharpness. And sure enough, there it was. Immediate disapproval, Alexandra. "You need to stop this." "Stop what?" I croaked out, feeling a jolt of confusion pierce my fever-addled mind. I was sick. I'd just closed on my condo, a 1-bedroom place in a decent part of the city that I'd been saving for my entire adult life, and apparently that made me selfish. Her words were clipped, like she was delivering a verdict rather than a conversation. "This whole condo thing, you're being affish, and you're hurting your sister. You know how sensitive she is." I blinked. My chest tightened, not just from the fever, but from this sudden spike of cold dread. I hadn't even moved in yet. The closing papers were still sitting in a manila envelope on my kitchenette counter. I had been so careful, so private about it, and now, suddenly, it was a moral crime. I tried to explain, but my voice rattled as harshly as my cough. "Mom, I sent one text to the family chat. I haven't even told my friends yet. I just wanted to share good news." Her response was sharp, almost slicing through the haze of my illness. "Well, your good news has consequences," she snapped. "It's not fair. Your father and I were just discussing it. Clara needs support. We expect you to do the right thing." And there it was. Her expectation wrapped up like a demand, not a suggestion. My fever blurred the edges of the words, but the intent was clear. My hard-earned achievement was suddenly a problem to be solved, and I was the obstacle. I tried to ground myself in logic. In reality, "Mom, what right thing? What are you asking me for?" Silence, and then my father's calm, commanding voice entered the line. "Alexandra," he said, the kind of tone that leaves no room for debate. "Your mother is right. We've decided on a fair solution. You need to add Clara's name to the deed of your condo." My heart stopped. Even before the coughing fit doubled me over, the quiet apartment felt smaller, suffocating. They weren't congratulating me. They were claiming my life's work. I whispered, my voice weak but determined. "No." My father's voice sharpened, incredulous. "What did you say?" I repeated. Louder, each word cutting through the ache in my chest. "I'll not be doing that. It's my condo. I paid for it. I worked for it." For a moment, there was only silence. No one spoke. And then the cold, deliberate voice of my mother tried to claw back control. "You ungrateful." But my father cut her off, calm but dangerous. "Fine, if you won't be reasonable. Alexandra, we'll make you be reasonable." The line went dead. I sat there in the dim light, staring at the manila envelope, my keys, my life's work, feeling a surreal combination of fever, fear, and a sudden, terrifying clarity. They weren't joking. They weren't trying to reason. They were serious. After years of working multiple jobs, pushing my body past every limit, sacrificing sleep, food, and comfort for independence, it all felt like it could be snatched away in an instant. And the betrayal, oh, it was worse than any sickness. The next 3 days were a blur of fever and anxiety. My phone stayed silent, no apologies, no calls checking on my health, just a chilling, heavy quiet. And with every quiet hour, I realized how distorted my family's system had been. Every rule, every expectation seemed to revolve around Clara. Every triumph of mine was somehow a threat. Every moment of my life measured against her struggles. And for the first time, sick and exhausted, I started seeing the truth of it all. The conversation with my parents only got worse from there. My mother's voice came through the phone, sharp and insistent, like she was lecturing a child. "You're parading your success. Alexandra, you're making Clara feel like a total failure." I coughed again, the pain stabbing through my chest, and tried to wrap my brain around what she was saying. Parading, I hadn't even mentioned the condo beyond one family text. I hadn't flaunted anything. I felt a mix of feverish exhaustion and disbelief. "Mom, I literally sent one text. I haven't told anyone else. I didn't parade anything," I wheezed, my lungs burning with each breath. The words barely came out, but I had to speak, had to assert that I wasn't in the wrong. She didn't pause, didn't soften. "No. Alexandra, you don't get it. You're being selfish. Your father and I were talking, and we've decided on the only fair solution. You have to add Clara to the deed." I froze mid-cough. My brain struggled to process her words. Add her to my condo, my property, the very place I had slaved over for years, scrimping, saving, working myself into the ground. The cold spike of dread shot straight through my chest. I felt my hands go clammy. I can't, I whispered. My voice shook. Fever or fear? Maybe both. My body felt suddenly too heavy to move. But my mind raced. Then my father's voice came in, calm but absolute. The kind of authority I'd grown up under but never wanted to hear like this. "Alexandra, your mother is right. This purchase was inconsiderate and impulsive. Adding Clara to the deed is the only equitable solution." Equitable. The word hung there like a gavel striking. I was too stunned, too sick, to form anything close to anger. All I felt was the hollowing sting of betrayal. My parents weren't proud of me. They weren't celebrating my hard work or acknowledging the sacrifices I'd made. They were demanding that I give away my life's achievement. My feverish mind scrambled. "Fair," I croaked. "Dad, how is this fair? I worked 3 jobs since I was 16. I paid for my tuition. I took out loans so I wouldn't need you for a dime. This condo is mine. I earned it." My voice cracked with both exhaustion and fury. But the words had to come out. There was no other way to assert myself. I could feel the fire rising despite the sickness, a clarity cutting through the fog of fatigue. This was mine. Everything about this condo, from the closing papers still sitting on my counter to the keys in my hand, was the result of my own years of work, blood, and willpower. And now, they were trying to take it from me. My mother's sharp tone returned, almost predatory. "Ungrateful," she said, her voice slicing through the room. Though I could only hear it through the phone, I flinched instinctively. My father jumped in, calm, slow, but with a quiet menace that chilled me. "Fine, if you won't be reasonable. Alexandra, we'll make you be reasonable. You've forgotten who you're dealing with." The line went dead. My chest tightened, my stomach churned. I sat there, trembling, the manila envelope and condo keys beside me, realizing the depth of their seriousness. They weren't threatening to lecture me. They were threatening to take my property. Everything I'd worked for every long day, every sleepless night, every scraped together dollar was suddenly in jeopardy. I could feel the weight of betrayal settling like a lead blanket over my body. I had survived on lukewarm tea, tiny meals, and sheer willpower for years. I'd lived in that tiny studio apartment, curling up in a single armchair, fighting off exhaustion and illness, all to build a life that was mine. And now they were trying to dictate what I could do with it. My chest ached, not just from fever, but from a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. My parents, the people who were supposed to celebrate me, to be proud of what I had achieved, were demanding that I hand over my hard-earned success. It was surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I coughed again, a deep racking sound, my body protesting the emotional and physical strain. "No," I whispered, voice hoarse but resolute. My father's voice cut in, incredulous, the kind of calm that only made it worse. "What did you say?" I repeated it louder, each word deliberate. "No, I will not add Clara. It's my condo. I paid for it. I worked for it." The words rang out, shaky but unwavering. I was sick, exhausted, and terrified, but there was no going back. This was my line, and I would not cross it. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Then my mother tried again, her voice rising, attempting to pierce through my resolve. "You've always been so focused on yourself," my father interrupted, dangerously quiet. "Fine, if you won't be reasonable, we'll make you be reasonable. You've forgotten who you're dealing with." His words were like ice, a reminder of the authority I had grown up under, the power he wielded as a senior partner, a man used to controlling outcomes. But underneath the fear, a strange clarity started to take root. They thought they held all the cards. They thought that they could bully me into compliance. They hadn't accounted for everything. I had the fever. Yes, I was weak, but I wasn't powerless. Not yet. I sat in the dim light of my studio, heart hammering, realizing that the fight wasn't just about a condo anymore. It was about autonomy, about the right to exist independently of the expectations and manipulations of my family. Every bit of exhaustion, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I'd made was suddenly juxtaposed against their demand that I give it all up. The injustice of it burned hotter than the fever coursing through me. I could feel my body trembling, the shaking of fever mixed with adrenaline. As the reality sank in my parents, the people I should have been able to trust were trying to take what was mine, under the guise of fairness, under the guise of helping my sister. And that's when it hit me, the sheer horrifying clarity of their system. Everything revolved around Clara. Every triumph I had was a threat. Every success a potential weapon against my sister's fragile ego. I could see it now. The patterns from childhood flashing back, celebrations cut short for her needs, accomplishments minimized if they made her uncomfortable. My own life carefully measured against her emotional state. And here I was, sick, exhausted, betrayed, facing the demand to surrender a life I had fought tooth and nail to build. I felt anger, shock, and a deep, aching betrayal intertwining into one heavy, suffocating knot. The line had gone dead. I was alone with the silence, the fever, the coughing, and the realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war over my own life. My parents had crossed a line, and I could feel the tension coiling inside me, a mix of fear and determination, ready to snap. I wasn't just fighting for a condo anymore. I was fighting for the right to exist on my own terms, to honor every sacrifice I'd made, every long, lonely hour of work that had brought me to this moment. And as the hours stretched on, The sense of betrayal only deepened, solidifying into a resolve I hadn't felt before. This wasn't over. Sitting there, fever still lingering, I started to really see the pattern. Clara wasn't just sensitive, she was manipulative in a way that had been allowed, even encouraged by my parents. It hit me in flashes, like snapshots from the past, the spelling bee I won at 10. And my parents never came because Clara had a headache. My college graduation dinner, cut short because Clara had a breakup and needed attention. Holidays spent rearranging plans around her moods. I realized my achievements were always framed as threats, as things that made her look smaller, weaker, or less successful. And somehow, that reflected back on my parents. They weren't proud of me, not really. They were protecting the narrative that Clara was the fragile center, and I was supposed to orbit her needs. Every memory of childhood started clicking into place, the way my mother swooped in whenever Clara shed a tear, no matter what I'd accomplished, the way she made excuses for her laziness or failures, calling it sensitivity or artistry, and my father, calm, collected, always concerned with appearances, had a hand in this too. My success highlighted Clara's failures, and in their eyes, that was a problem. I realized that for my parents, my strength wasn't something to celebrate, it was a responsibility, a duty, a tool to keep the family system from collapsing around Clara's needs. And Clara, oh, she had learned the rules perfectly. Tears on command, soft pleas, dramatic sighs at just the right moments. It wasn't malicious, I told myself. At least not initially, it was survival. Learned behavior in a house where she was the favored one. But I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Every time I tried to carve out a life for myself, every time I succeeded, it became a source of tension, guilt, or outright anger from my parents. And the weird part, I never saw myself as competitive. I wasn't trying to overshadow anyone. I was just living my life, trying to get by, trying to build something of my own. But in their eyes, my life was always a referendum on Clara's worth, a comparison I never asked for. I remembered the loft downtown they had given her, and all the art supplies, her car, the dinners out, and contrasted it with my cramped apartment, the instant noodles, the 12-hour workdays. They had invested so much in her, not to nurture her, but to maintain a narrative of her being the sensitive, delicate child who needed protection. And now, with the condo, that narrative was under threat. Suddenly, it all clicked. My parents weren't mad because I hadn't consulted them. They weren't worried about family harmony. They were defending the established order. Clara had to remain the center, and anything I did that didn't align with that, anything that suggested I had agency, independence, success, it challenged the whole system. I also started to see the subtle ways my parents justified it to themselves. They weren't abusive in the traditional sense. They were enablers of a very specific type of dysfunction. My mother's kindness was selective, my father's authority absolute. They had built a household where my sister's needs were prioritized, and my accomplishments were tolerated only insofar as they didn't disrupt the delicate balance. And I had spent years unknowingly conforming, adjusting, bending my life around an invisible framework that wasn't built for me. It was exhausting, even in memory. I thought back to the small moments I had ignored before, like my artless attempts to celebrate milestones, only to be overshadowed by Clara's crises, or the times my parents would defend her in ways that made me feel guilty for even speaking up. The realization hit me hard. I hadn't been a selfish daughter. I had been a collateral casualty of a family system designed to elevate one sibling at the expense of the other. My successes, instead of being recognized, had been weaponized against me, subtly, quietly, over years. And in that moment, fever and all, a sense of clarity came. It wasn't just about the condo, it was about recognizing the toxicity, The patterns that had governed my life, the unspoken rules that demanded I put someone else's comfort above my own. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being dramatic. This was real, and it had been happening since I could remember. And for the first time, instead of feeling trapped, I started to feel a little bit of empowerment. I could see the structure. I could see the rules. I could see the players. And that meant maybe I could finally figure out how to play my own hand. A week later, the letter arrived. Not a text, not a casual email, but a formal courier-delivered envelope that immediately set my stomach twisting. My hands shook as I tore it open. The kind of shaking that comes from a mix of fever, lingering stress, and that gnawing, instinctive sense that something was very, very wrong. The paper inside was intimidating in its precision, full of legal jargon and cold, detached language. It wasn't just a complaint, it was an accusation of misappropriation, of exploiting family resources for my own gain. They were calling it unjust enrichment, a term that made my chest tighten with disbelief. I sank into my tiny armchair, heart hammering. I read and reread the document, my eyes darting from one line to the next, trying to make sense of the audacity of it all. They weren't asking, they were demanding. They wanted me to add Clara to the deed within 30 days, or they would file a lawsuit to force the sale of my condo and redistribute the proceeds. My condo, my hard-earned, painfully saved condo. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe properly, my mind racing, trying to parse how they could even suggest such a thing. I had done everything right. I had sacrificed. I had pushed myself past every imaginable limit to create a life that was mine. And now they were trying to strip it away under the guise of fairness. And then, almost unconsciously, my brain clicked. Wait, this isn't just about me being overwhelmed. I have tools. I have skills. My hands stopped trembling slightly as the thought grounded me. I'm a forensic accountant. I've spent years dissecting financial records, finding discrepancies that others miss, uncovering patterns hidden in plain sight. This wasn't just a personal attack, it was a situation I could analyze. Methodically, objectively. My fear started to shift, blending with the spark of determination I hadn't felt in days. I thought back to the countless hours I'd spent in college and at my jobs, cross-referencing ledgers, decoding complex spreadsheets, identifying misallocated funds. My parents might have thought they had the upper hand, that their authority and legal maneuvering would intimidate me, but they had underestimated the skill set I had been honing my entire adult life. Suddenly, the paranoia and dread were replaced with a focused clarity. I could fight this, and I could do it on my terms. I started digging into what I already knew. Over the years, I had glimpsed certain irregularities in my father's personal financial habits. He was meticulous, precise, always controlling, and he had a habit of compartmentalizing accounts. Some I had been allowed to help digitize while I was learning forensic accounting in college, ostensibly as a favor, but really, it was an education in their private finances. And somewhere in those files, a pattern emerged that I hadn't fully explored a separate account labeled the Clara Cares Fund. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. It seemed like a family savings or investment account for my sister. But now, under the stress of the legal threat, it felt like a thread worth pulling. I began piecing together the small clues I'd noticed over the years. This account, I remembered, was always carefully hidden from general view, tucked away in a folder of personal finance papers my father handed me to digitize. It was a tidy little spreadsheet, unassuming, but with numbers that didn't quite add up, small, regular transfers that never seemed to have a clear source. tiny reimbursements, management fees that felt arbitrary. At the time, I chalked it up to my father's precision and peculiar habits. But now, knowing their motives, the red flags started to flash. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The Clara Cares Fund wasn't just a harmless savings account. It had a funding source that was off limits, morally and legally questionable. My father, as a fiduciary and power of attorney for our elderly Aunt Lydia, managed her estate, a responsibility he was legally bound to perform with integrity. And I had seen transfers from her trust account that flowed straight into this Clara Cares Fund. At the time, I'd assumed some bookkeeping quirk or family misunderstanding, but now, under the lens of a potential lawsuit against me, it became a weapon, a revelation that could change everything. I felt a mix of shock and disbelief wash over me. The realization hit like a physical blow. My father had been diverting money meant for my aunt's care to fund my sister's lifestyle. And now they were trying to accuse me of unjust enrichment. The audacity of it was staggering. My chest tightened, a mixture of rage and adrenaline fueling my thoughts. I wasn't just dealing with a petty family dispute anymore. This was larger. This was criminal, felony elder financial abuse. And the most insane part, I had been sitting on the knowledge of it for years, thinking it was a harmless side detail, a quirk of my father's accounting that didn't concern me. But now I could see the pattern, and I knew exactly how to leverage it. I leaned back in my chair, still feverish, staring at the envelope and the papers spread before me. My mind was racing. How do I prove it? How do I connect the dots? I didn't need direct access to his bank accounts. I had skills and training. I could use the publicly available data, cross-reference property sales, care facility costs, bank filings, and piece together a pattern strong enough to show that these transfers were systematic, deliberate, and illegal. I could reconstruct the whole scheme with evidence that would be undeniable. My adrenaline began to push back the fatigue. My fever still hot, but my focus sharpened. I spent hours thinking through the process. I could compile everything into secure file dates, amounts, cross-referenced property records, care facility expenses, anything that showed discrepancies between what was claimed and what actually happened. I could create timelines, spreadsheets, comparisons, even reach out to a private investigator for verification of my aunt's actual living situation. The pieces were there. They'd always been there, quietly waiting for me to connect them. And suddenly, a cold, thrilling sense of possibility replaced the horror and disbelief. I wasn't just reacting to a legal threat. I had an opportunity to expose the truth and protect myself, and at the same time, do what was right for my aunt. It was a strange, heady mixture: fear, rage, excitement, and clarity, all wrapped together. The realization that my father, the man who had threatened to take my condo and destroy my life, had done far worse in secret, shifted the power dynamic entirely. The legal threat against me was ridiculous, almost laughable, compared to the audacity of what he had been doing behind the scenes. And the fact that I had the skill set to unravel it meant that for the first time, I could go on the offensive. I could turn years of hidden knowledge into leverage, into a plan of action. My initial plan began to form in that fevered haze. I would document everything meticulously, compile my evidence, and create a narrative that was impossible to ignore. I would involve professionals where necessary: a lawyer for the legal side, a private investigator for verification. I wasn't just fighting a frivolous lawsuit. I was preparing to expose a crime, to protect my assets, and ensure justice was served for my aunt. And in the midst of all that, there was a quiet, growing sense of empowerment. I had been underestimated, dismissed as just a kid playing with numbers, and now My numbers would speak louder than anyone's accusations. They thought they knew everything. They didn't. They had forgotten one crucial thing: I wasn't just a daughter. I was an analyst, and I knew exactly where to look. The days that followed were a grueling blur. I spent 12-hour shifts at work and then came home to my tiny studio apartment and dove into another 8 hours of relentless research. My laptop became an extension of my own mind. I cross-referenced every transaction I could find: property records, bank statements, care facility expenses, anything that could shed light on the irregularities, each number, each transfer. I scrutinized with the meticulous attention I had developed over years of forensic accounting. At first, it felt overwhelming. The sheer volume of data, the complexity of the transfers, the stakes, it was almost paralyzing. But with each passing hour, the picture became clearer, sharper, and the unease transformed into a quiet, precise determination. I realized I couldn't do it alone. Even with my skill set, some verification was necessary. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, a contact provided by my lawyer, Miss Evans. She had warned me that nothing short of hard evidence would make a difference. And she was right. The investigator, thorough and discreet, performed a wellness check on Aunt Lydia, confirming her living situation, the facility she was actually residing in, and the discrepancies in the reported costs. Each detail added another layer of certainty to what I already suspected: my father had been siphoning money meant for her care into the Clara Cares Fund, funding a lifestyle for my sister that was entirely unjustified. Nights blurred into mornings as I compiled the evidence into a single, cohesive file. Timelines, spreadsheets, property sale comparisons, fiduciary management reports, the PI's findings all meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and summarized. I created visuals that made the discrepancies impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about my condo anymore. It was about revealing a system of deliberate financial manipulation. And I needed to do it in a way that left no room for argument, no chance for my father to wriggle out of accountability. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived. I walked into the law firm representing my parents. The polished marble floors and dark wood panels, a sharp contrast to my simple studio and the raw anxiety coursing through me. I carried nothing but my laptop, a symbol of every hour spent uncovering the truth. Ms. Evans was on standby, but she would not speak. This was my presentation, my moment to lay everything bare. The conference room was cold and imposing. My parents, my father in a tailored suit, my mother neatly composed, sat across from me, looking like a united front. Clara was there too, slouched in her seat, her phone in hand, scrolling absently as if she had nothing at stake. Their lawyer, Harrison, perched at the head of the table, gave a rehearsed smile. "We're here to find an amicable solution," he began, shuffling papers. "My clients are deeply hurt by your selfish actions, but they are prepared to be gracious." I took a deep breath and interrupted, calm, even measured, my voice cutting through the room's tense air. "I'm going to stop you right there. Mr. Harrison, we are not here to discuss my condo. We are here to discuss account number 4771B, the Clara Cares Fund." The air shifted instantly. My mother and Clara's faces contorted in confusion. My father, usually composed, went pale, the color draining from his face as his eyes locked on mine. And for the first time, I saw pure panic in his expression. It was the power of evidence, quiet and undeniable. And he had never expected it. I opened my laptop and projected the first slide. "This fund," I said, pointing, "has been contributed to by both of you since 2018. On the surface, responsible, yes. But the source of these funds. Let's review." I clicked to the next tab, revealing a timeline: the sale of Aunt Lydia's primary residence, the net profit, and the transfer of $150,000 into the Clara Cares Fund, coded as a fiduciary management fee, a 17% fee. Dad, that's quite high, isn't it? My father's lips moved, but no words came. He was caught, and it was visible in every line of tension in his face. Harrison tried to interject. "This is private family business," I cut him off. Calm but sharp. "You made it public when you sued me. Let's talk about unjust enrichment. I will show you exactly where the enrichment came from and how it was illegally sourced." I clicked to a side-by-side comparison. On one side, the monthly fees actually paid to the state-run facility Fsasasan, where Aunt Lydia lived, $4,200. On the other, the amounts reported to the fiduciary records, $14,000. The difference, $9,800, was going directly into the Clara Cares Fund. Every transfer meticulously documented, every invoice cross-checked. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Clara, for the first time, looked genuinely unsettled. My father's control started to crumble, his usual calm, the armor of senior partner authority, slipped into a flustered, almost childlike panic. "This is private," he hissed, voice tight, voice cracking. I met his eyes steadily. "No, Dad, this is the result of your actions, and now it is public. Your lawsuit is funded with stolen money. Every penny used to pay your attorney or fund your daughter's lifestyle was taken illegally. I am presenting facts, not opinions." I moved to the final tab, the PI report, dated photographs of Aunt Lydia, sterile and basic, as opposed to the luxurious accommodations my father had claimed. "This is where your sister is living while you funded the fund for Clara's downtown loft and BMW," I said, my voice quiet, but each word heavy. My mother sobbed quietly. Clara's eyes were wide, panicked. Harrison tried to cut in, but I shook my head. "I am not threatening anyone. I am presenting facts." "Mr. Harrison, your client is now on notice that the source of his lawsuit funding is criminally obtained. Check the figures if you like." The room was tense, silent except for the soft hum of the projector. My father could not respond, could not deny, and the power of the spreadsheets and documentation had done what nothing else could. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the air. Drop the lawsuit. Today. Never contact me again about my condo, and move Aunt Lydia back to her rightful care. Pay back every cent you stole. If I see so much as a shadow of this case again, the entire file goes to the district attorney, the IRS, and the state accountancy board. Am I clear? My voice was ice, calm, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. My father stared, mouth opening and closing, but no sound came. He nodded weakly. Finally, his authority evaporated, replaced with the stark reality of exposure. I stood, head held high, and walked out, leaving behind the tension, the shock, the carefully constructed facade of my family. I had anticipated resistance, perhaps tears, pleading, maybe anger. But the silence and sheer realization of their vulnerability was almost more satisfying than any apology could have been. It wasn't just about winning, it was about asserting control, exposing the truth, and reclaiming my agency. And for the first time in months, I felt a quiet, deep sense of power and clarity. The fallout was swift and merciless. My father, the senior partner who had tried to intimidate me, faced immediate consequences once the authorities got involved. His CPA license was suspended pending an internal investigation, and his firm, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, issued a public statement noting that a partner was on leave for personal reasons. Removing his name and photo from every page overnight, within days, the scope of his mismanagement and embezzlement became public knowledge within professional circles. And the repercussions hit hard. The Clara Cares Fund was frozen, and all illegally diverted money earmarked for Aunt Lydia's care was recovered. The state ensured she was moved back to a high-quality private care facility. her comfort and safety fully restored, paid for entirely with the funds that had been stolen from her. My mother's world shifted dramatically as well. The financial cushion she had relied upon for a lifestyle that included Clara's indulgences vanished. Her Etsy shop, once a minor hobby, became her primary source of income, and it was barely enough to cover basic expenses. She had to take a real job, a cashier position at a local grocery store. And the illusion of authority she had wielded over family matters crumbled. My sister Clara, on the other hand, faced a more public downfall. Her loft apartment was repossessed, the BMW taken back, and the funds that had allowed her to float through life were gone. She now had to confront the realities of a world where she had to earn her own way. Her social media went silent. The mask of the struggling but sensitive artist shattered. The entitlement that had been carefully nurtured by my parents' enabling was gone, and she was forced up for the first time to stand on her own feet. It was a painful, abrupt awakening, but a necessary one. And in that, there was a strange sense of relief for me. Amid all this chaos, I reclaimed my condo, the space that had been a symbol of my independence, my hard work, and my resilience was finally mine in every sense. I furnished it, filled it with the books and items I had painstakingly saved for, and for the first time, I could sit and breathe without feeling like my life was under siege. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to affirm my right to exist independently, free from manipulation and coercion. The anxiety and fever that had plagued me for months lifted in that quiet space, replaced by a reflective, almost meditative clarity. I could finally appreciate the fact that my life, built on sacrifice and integrity, was intact, and that my resilience had not been for nothing. Clara reached out eventually, a text that simply asked if we could talk. My first instinct was to delete it, to shut the door completely, but I paused. I typed back a measured, "Okay." We agreed to meet at a public park halfway between my condo and her new apartment. When I saw her, she was thinner, quieter, and the entitlement that had defined her for so long was replaced by a raw, weary sadness. She apologized, her words tentative but sincere. She admitted that she hadn't known the source of the money she had been living on, that she hadn't considered the consequences, and that she had let the family manipulate us both into a web of guilt and deception. It was the first honest, unfiltered moment she had ever offered, sitting across from her. I realized that the relationship we could have moving forward wasn't about recreating the past, but building something new, authentic, and grounded in reality. She told me she had started painting again, not for validation, not for anyone else's approval, but for herself. Cheap canvases, barista wages, simple, modest, but real. And I felt a quiet satisfaction, seeing her attempt to reclaim her own independence and responsibility. I promised to see her work, a small gesture of support and acknowledgement. It was tentative, fragile, but it felt like a first step toward a relationship that could be genuine rather than performative. As for my parents, the consequences were severe. The house I had grown up in was sold to repay Aunt Lydia and cover my legal expenses. Their lives, once cushioned by wealth and influence, were reduced to a small rental across town. My father's career was destroyed. He lost his license and faced probation, fines, and restitution. My mother had to confront her own enabling behavior and the reality of her choices. Both of them were forced to reckon with the magnitude of their actions, not just financially, but morally and emotionally. Throughout all of this, I experienced a profound sense of closure and self-validation. I had lost a family that had exploited my diligence, manipulated my successes, and tried to rob me of my achievements. Yet in that loss, I had gained something far more important: my autonomy, my peace of mind, and the validation that my resilience and integrity were strengths, not liabilities. I had faced deception, manipulation, and threats of legal action from the people I should have trusted most. And I had emerged not only unscathed, but empowered. Having wielded my skills to achieve justice and protect the vulnerable, reflecting on it, I understood that this was never really about a condo. It was about a systemic imbalance, a long-standing pattern of favoritism, manipulation, and abuse that I had been too young or too naive to confront fully until now. The legal and personal victories were intertwined. Exposing the truth restored not only the material injustices, but also a moral order that had been long disrupted. Aunt Lydia's care was secure. Clara was confronted with the real world, and my own life, painstakingly built and defended, was finally my own. I would never speak to my father again, and my mother remained distant, trapped in her own resentment and the consequences of her choices. But the condo, the life I had created, and the quiet moments of independence I now enjoyed were victories I could fully claim. Even the painful history with Clara could evolve into something real, tentative, but honest. In the end, justice had been served, not through revenge or anger, but through the careful, deliberate application of truth, skill, and integrity. I had been tested in every way imaginable, and for the first time, I could sit quietly in my own space and feel that I was truly, completely free. It's been a journey, hasn't it? I learned a lot about resilience, standing up for myself, and what it really means to be independent. I finally feel like my life is truly mine, built on my own hard work and choices. Stories like this remind us how important it is to trust our own strength. If you enjoyed hearing this, consider liking or subscribing. And I'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Share in the comments.